I want to start off by sharing a story with you guys about two builders. Let's call them Ernie and Edward. Each decided to build a house. Ernie, the older brother, was very strong and determined, but he wanted to do everything his own way. He didn't pay attention to the careful instructions given by the architect, and instead, he used cheap materials, rushing through the work just to finish quickly. Edward, the younger brother, listened closely to the architect's directions. He chose strong wood and steady stones, taking his time to build his house correctly. Even though it took longer, Edward knew that his careful work would make his house strong and safe. One day, a fierce storm came with howling winds and heavy rain. Ernie's house, built in haste and without following proper instructions, was quickly torn apart by the storm. However, Edward's house, built with patience and care, stood strong against the wind and rain. Seeing his own house fall apart, Ernie grew very angry. Instead of looking at his own mistakes, he blamed Edward for having a better house. In his frustration, Ernie even tried to destroy what he could not build, showing that his choice to ignore wise advice had cost him dearly. From the beginning of time, men have had two paths to choose from. One that follows God's way, building something lasting, and one that seeks power and success on their own terms, often leading to destruction. Cain's path represents men who put themselves first, seeking to build their own kingdoms without God. Abel's path represents men who honor God first, trusting that obedience and patience will build something greater. We see this struggle in history and in our world today. Some men choose their strength to protect and lead, while others use it to dominate and to take. Some build families with love and sacrifice, while others chase pleasure and leave destruction behind. The question is not whether men will build, because all men are builders, but what and who they're building for. And I want you guys to think about the danger of corruption. Let that settle in. Just as Cain's descendants continued in his rebellious ways, turning their skills and knowledge towards selfish gain, many today twist the gifts that God gave them. Cities and cultures rise, but instead of honoring God, they glorify wealth, pleasure, and power. This has led to violence, broken families, and confusion about what it means to be a man. Even marriage, designed by God to be a source of life and strength, has been corrupted. Instead of a man cherishing his wife as his partner, relationships have become about control, desire, and selfishness. We see this pattern throughout history, from the days before Noah's flood to the fall of great kingdoms. When men abandon God's way, the world suffers. Now, I want you to think about the true strength of a man and what it means to you. The real mark of a strong man is not how much he can take, but how much he can give. A wise man builds his life on God's truth. He protects those he cares for and resists the temptation to live only for himself. Jesus, the ultimate example of masculinity, did not seek his own glory, but laid down his life for others. That is the kind of strength that builds something eternal. So ask yourself, what kind of builder are you? Will you be like Ernie, building a life that falls when the storms come? Or will you be like Edward, building on the firm foundation of faith, knowing that when you build and what you build will stand forever? The choice is yours, but the storm is coming, and every man's work will be tested. I just want to take a moment to express my deepest and most heartfelt gratitude that my wife, Monica, is not a toxic woman. Because let's be honest, life is already challenging enough without having a Proverbs 4:1 demolition crew working from the inside. Paul warns us that bad company corrupts good morals. And if that's true for friendships, imagine what happens when you're legally, financially, and emotionally bound to that company for life. A good wife is like a well-tuned GPS for your mission, helping you navigate, recalibrate when needed, and keeping you from driving straight off a cliff. A toxic wife, on the other hand, is like getting directions from a GPS with a virus. It confidently leads you straight into traffic, through roadblocks, and eventually off a bridge. But praise God, Monica is a builder, not a bulldozer. She doesn't tear down the house with her own hands. She strengthens it, making it a place of peace, wisdom, and probably well-organized cabinets. Instead of leading me into chaos, she partners with me in building something meaningful. And for that, I am eternally grateful. So here's to all of our wives who proves every day that a good wife is a blessing, a helper, and most importantly, not an instrument of destruction. I may not have deserved this level of divine mercy, but I'll take it. Marriage is a life-altering decision, and both men and women must be careful in choosing a spouse. A wise choice brings joy, strength, and a household built on solid ground. But a foolish one can lead to suffering. Proverbs warns that many have fallen into destruction because of an ungodly woman. And countless men can testify to the misery of being trapped in such a marriage. The best strategy is to avoid that path altogether. Wisdom says not to stray near her. Proverbs 7:25. Just as Satan deceived Adam through Eve, he still uses toxic femininity as a tool to weaken and destroy godly men. No man is above falling into this trap, not even the wisest like Solomon. Avoiding obvious dangers isn't enough. Satan's most effective attacks are often subtle and disguised. Think about the hidden dangers of deception. Evil rarely introduces itself outright. It starts small, creeping in through compromise, much like how culture gradually shifted from rejecting immorality to celebrating it. Satan's children, like their father, are masters of disguise, appearing good and harmless until it's too late. He disguises himself as an angel of light, as we're reminded in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 14. And his servants do the same. History shows how powerful women like Jezebel used manipulation to bring destructions in 1 Kings chapter 21. The enemy's strategy has been remarkably effective in weakening men and distorting God's design, especially in the area of sexuality. Over generations, subtle compromises in modesty and purity lead to a society where sexual immorality is tolerated, then embraced. Think about the loud woman and the soft man. A key weapon in this cultural downfall is the loud and stubborn woman, as we're reminded in Proverbs 7, verse 11. This is not just about clothing or appearance, but a spirit of rebellion, one that rejects God's order and seeks control over men. Many churches today turn a blind eye to this issue, allowing immodesty and disorder to flourish. But this isn't just about women. Satan's strategy only works when combined with weak and passive men who fail to stand firm. The rebellion traces back to the curse in Genesis 3:16, where God warned that a woman's desire would be against her husband, and he would have to lead. The battle today is not just about clothing or behavior, but about whether men and women will submit to God's order or allow chaos to reign. So here's my first question to you guys. How can a strong, mission-driven man lead in a way that upholds God's design for relationships and society? What steps can we take to protect ourselves from destructive influences while encouraging women to embrace their God-given role? To lead in a way that upholds God's design, we first have to be grounded in our faith, understanding that true strength comes from obedience to God, not the world's standards. A man on a mission with a clear purpose doesn't let distractions or toxic influences pull him away from God's calling and from the course. Leadership starts with personal discipline, staying true to God's word, setting the example of integrity, and making wise decisions, even when it's tough. A strong man builds his life on God's foundation, which includes loving and protecting those around him, particularly the woman in his life. To protect himself from destructive influences, a man must be vigilant and discerning about who he associates with and what he allows in his mind. Avoiding bad company is key, and that means choosing friends and partners who share his values. He should also stand firm when necessary, calling out wrongs without hesitation. When it comes to encouraging women to embrace their God-given roles, a real man leads by example, respecting women as partners and building a strong family and society. He sets the standard by showing honor, respect, and love, which helps create an environment where both men and women thrive in their roles. Leadership isn't about domination. It's about serving others and ensuring everyone follows God's order for a fulfilling and impactful life. A loud woman is not just someone who speaks loudly. Her loudness is in her unruly nature, refusing to submit to God's design for her rule. Instead of embracing the quiet strength of a godly woman, she seeks control, manipulate, and disrupt, much like the deceitful woman described in Proverbs 7. This rebellion against her role doesn't just affect her home. It spreads into society, weakening the foundation of families and communities. In contrast, a godly woman supports and builds up her household, honoring the order God established for men and women. This can be compared to long-distance running, where success depends on discipline and submission to the process. A runner who constantly fights against the training, ignores proper rest, or refuses to follow a structured plan will eventually break down. Likewise, a woman who resists her role and disrupts the household tears apart the very structure meant to support her. In jiu-jitsu, a student who refuses to listen to their coach or train with humility will never master the art. They will become reckless, relying on brute force rather than skill. A loud woman, like an undisciplined fighter, resists the structure meant to shape her, ultimately harming herself and those around her. Just as brotherhood is essential in both running and jiu-jitsu, at least for me it is, so is the right partnership in life. A man surrounded by strong, disciplined brothers is more likely to stay on course, pushing through challenges and growing in his abilities. Similarly, a man with godly with a godly wife is strengthened in his mission to lead, build, protect, and serve. But if he joins himself to a woman who despises her role, she will sabotage his efforts, much like a bad training partner who refuses to follow the rules, making progress impossible. Here's the second question. How do the people we surround ourselves with shape who we become? And what happens when we choose friends or role models who lead us away from what is good and right? Can you think of a time when having the right people by your side helped you stay on the right path? When I ask myself this question, I'm reminded of the recent marathon we just ran with Justin, Isaac, Christian, and Olson. I remember Justin's sister telling him as we were sitting at the beach after the race, he better be careful who he hangs out with. And feeling encouraged that I may have had a little influence and encouraging him to do something that he may have thought in the past would never be possible. Yet, without a doubt, I know that this challenge shaped who he is today and the man that he will continue to evolve into. Again, first question, how can strong, mission-driven men lead in a way that upholds God's design for relationships and society? What steps can us men take to protect ourselves from destructive influences while encouraging women to embrace their God-given role?